Hello, my name is Chris Snipes, and you are listening to The Melt. Today's guests have both been on The Melt previously, and I invited them both on today because they both have a major overlap in their life experiences. Carlos Castaneda. As you may have heard in the previous episode that Hunter Muse was on, she spent many years involved in the cult of Carlos as a devotee and student. Jasun Horsley's interests in Carlos began with the need to start over after a big breakup, when he began reading Carlos's books about Don Juan, a Yaqui shaman that utilized altered states of mind and dream work to expand one's awareness. What they encountered on their travels was a combination of deep wisdom and cosmic folly. Hunter saw the inner workings of the strange quasi-religion surrounding Carlos from the inside, whereas Jasun's journey was more of a solo affair, having little to do with any egoic cult of personality. When it becomes more about the teacher rather than the teachings, things can go south quick, and they went deep south. Listen as these two speak of their very different experiences with the enigma of Carlos Castaneda, yet how their individual journeys originated in surprisingly similar contexts. I start off the interview by asking how it was that Jasun first came across the writings of Castaneda. Maybe we can just start off by, I'm not exactly sure, Jasun, how you came across Castaneda. How did you stumble upon him?
It was an astrologer called Lindbergh Beck. He's written a few books, and I was in a place of heartbreak. I'd kind of had my first breakup at the age of, how old was I, 20, and I went to see the astrologer on the advice of my mother, and on his advice I started reading Carlos Castaneda, and I was almost instantly hooked. I read all the books in a period of probably about 2 months, or perhaps less even. I know I was trying to read them as slowly as possible because I didn't want it to be over. And I know also before I had finished the series, this was only 8 at that point, up to Power of Silence, I had decided to learn Spanish and move to Oaxaca. So it was completely a total convert, an instant convert.
What snagged you? What drew you in so powerfully?
Well, on that podcast I sent you, I've just done, I think I talked about this, but I don't want to repeat myself, but I think it confirmed something that I had sensed and been seeking for, which was magic, the possibility of magic, the possibility of the impossible. So it just seemed like the most glamorous and romantic life possible, that of a sorcerer. I'm smiling because of how utterly naive I was about that. Even at the most surface level, that was incredibly naive. But
so, in case people haven't heard the previous episode with Hunter, what was it that drew you to Castaneda?
My initial training was in Catholicism, and then that evolved into Buddhism and a fascination with mysticism. And I think once I'd opened the door to mysticism, and I felt like modern religion and the modern iteration of religion and spirituality wasn't something that resonated with me. And so I just, in my desperate need for furthering my spiritual education and a desire to connect with something other than what's considered the known world, I fell upon this book. And when I first tried to read his first book, it was really written like a thesis, and so, or an attempt to write it as a thesis. And so I felt like I couldn't sink my teeth in it. But when I read Journey to Eastlawn, it immediately felt like the answer to so many questions that I had. And so I was also hooked. And then I just consumed these books and was at this place in my life. I was 14 years old. When I turned 16, in those 2 years, there was major life changes that happened for me and my family. And in that time, I was very open. And I made a virginal intent to connect with him. Not in a sexual way. I just wanted to find my teacher. And I felt like he was the closest one. I knew that Don Juan was already gone. So Castaneda seemed to be the only link to this dual reality and a way of connecting with the Nawal and the unknown world, this layer of the onion that's right beneath, next to, above the one that we call normal reality, the tonal. So when I jumped in and I started to really examine his teachings, it made so much sense to me that disconnecting and doing these not doings could calibrate your brain in a different way and open up these different levels of perception, and that our constant self-reflection and the idea of the self and how we're projecting ourselves to the world is really the thing that's impeding us from connecting with what some would consider divinity in Catholicism. And in order to have these holy moments, you have to come to the state of egolessness. So that was the hook, because school and what I was learning in the quote unquote modern world wasn't getting me. None of it seemed real. Like the idea that buying a home, falling in love, getting married, buying a home, having children, and then, death and taxes were the only things that you could really look forward to. I knew just empirically that there was something else. And so my journey was, where do I hook up to this link of the spirit? Like, how do I connect with the spirit? And what Castaneda was saying is, I'm the only link. So that's what got me. I was like, okay, well, I'm going to find you. If you're the only way, then I'm going to find you.
That wasn't a red flag from the get-go?
No, of course not. And I grew up in the era of Moonies and, the Hare Krishnas and, a huge movement of the false gurus, so the package that he sold was so perfect, because it was this elderly Native American, Southern American Indian. And it was like, of course he has the answers. If it had been some buttoned up, civic duty officer or, or a judge, he'd say, this is the person that holds the key to infinity. I don't think that the sales pitch would have been so easy to digest, but because he draped it in this very mystical caricature, I think the world wanted that, because we all go to these same sources. We're all seeking. We're all trying to find the answers, because ultimately I think everyone sees through the veil. And so anything that could bring you closer to peeling those layers back was the stuff that I was interested in. But he made it untenable. Like the recapitulation list, when they sat down and said, okay, you have to write down every single person you've ever had any interaction with. I'm talking like the last person that was the checkout girl at the Dillon's Market to your mother and father. Because those engagements and having any exchanges with people capture your energy and catch your attention and are the things that keep us not free. So just try to imagine the life task of trying to do that, of remembering every single person you've ever had any even casual exchange with.
Did you go through that whole process, Jason?
Oh yeah, I was going to ask Hunter why she thinks he did that, because I mean, I think I was as desperate as I needed to be to believe in those books and to want to find my own Nahal and all the rest of it. Like I was taken in, but at the same time, maybe if I had met a Nahal or met Castaneda, obviously that would have been very different. So maybe then I would have taken more seriously some of the prescriptions in the book, but I never took that one seriously insofar as I thought I would try and do it, because as Hunter's saying, I mean, it's just so obviously manifestly impossible. I mean, of course he's talking about flying Nahals and turning into animals, so I suppose that's part of the trick, isn't it? Because I was drawn to that and I knew that that was theoretically impossible, but I believed that and I wanted that. So then the recapitulation, I sort of believed that was possible too, but I no more attempted to recapitulate my whole life or remember every encounter I'd ever had than I tried to turn into a crow. You know, I sensed that wasn't something I'd use my will to do. I mean, thank God I had enough intuition for that. So I didn't, but I did my own version of it. I did write down lists. I did try to write down all the people I could remember, but I didn't even consider trying to remember checkout bills and stuff, because
Sure.
I mean, a man's got to know his limitations, as the famous movie has it, and I knew mine there. But I'm curious about that. The sort of the psychological rationale behind that, of presenting people with tasks which are manifestly impossible. You would think that would be counterproductive because it would put people off, but I think it can be effective, can't it? Because, as I say, if people are already drawn in to believe the impossible, then they'll extend that to these tasks that they'll know they're impossible, but they'll still attempt them because they want so badly the power, and then they're hooked forever. Because if you've committed to an impossible task, then of course you're never going to graduate.
Well, I think the idea is really to engage you in these untenable tasks and create this hierarchy of specialness. So the people who are on the top tier of that would be Castaneda, of course, who claimed that he had recapitulated his entire life from the last encounter that he had to his parents. And then you would have the witches underneath him, which were initially purported to be students of Castanedas, but then they later claimed to be actual students of Don Juan's. So they were the next level of people who'd claimed that they had recapitulated their lives. What they said was that the more you did it, the more rote that became for you, the more energy it freed up, the easier the recapitulation actually became, to the point where you would forget people that knew you from your childhood, and that you would become unrecognizable to the people from your childhood because they all changed their appearance. So we're talking, like, again, very cult mentality. We all have the same haircut because the idea is that hair contains personal history. So we got to get rid of that. We all cut ourselves from media, so no one watches television. We all cut ourselves from our families, our friends, anyone who knew you as a previous person before you joined the group. And what was hilarious is they always said, there is no group. There's no group, but do these things that make you separate from your daily life and your people. So, some people left families and never turned back again. One woman, I know someone who worked for Clear Green, and they were getting calls worldwide of from family members saying, "You've kidnapped my daughter." And she had an infant child that she left and is now dead because she hadn't weaned this baby, this Russian woman who disappeared. And these were common things that were happening at Clear Green because people get so fanatical about the system of belief, because again, it's affording you this idea that you are going to be able to redream yourself. And he used to say, "I hope you like the outfit you're wearing because you're going to take it all with you. You will literally burn from within." And so it's shoes and all that go into the next filing. Now, there was really a lot of people that purported to be doing these things, and yet were sneaking away and going and eating chocolate, or sneaking away and having sexual relationships, or sneaking away and visiting their families, or having relationships. So if they didn't make it any further in the group, it was because of that. That was the excuse. Well, you're still attached to your ego. You still want to eat Hershey bars, or you still want to go and cuddle your cats, or whatever it is that connects you to the earth and to this plane of reality. He wanted you to divorce yourself from all of those things, which again is about controlling behavior.
Was that a part of you shedding sort of your past identity, Jason, moving to Oaxaca and learning Spanish?
Yeah, it was a pattern. It was the beginning of a pattern. I mean, I can trace the pattern back to my childhood and my mother's behavior, because she kept moving house. So she was always trying to, this is the thing, it's a spectrum. What we see with sorcerers or wannabe sorcerers or cult members and so on, it's just a magnified condition that is in all of us. Like, we're all seeking for a sense of purpose and reality and meaning, and we're all feeling trapped in our identities to one degree or another. So even my mother drinking alcohol and moving house the whole time, you could say that that was her version of a kind of trauma-based spiritual quest, unconscious, right? So, but I didn't see all of that until many years, decades later. What I saw was, that I'd been, like Hunter was saying, I'd been given a glimpse of some true meaning, and I was going to go after it with all I had. So it was like, I have money. I'd already done it, and when I turned 20, I'd moved to New York, thinking I was going to be a screenwriter. So I made a fresh start, a whole new start in New York. And I traveled to Hollywood. I got sick in Hollywood, and so I ended up bouncing back to England just because I was so ill. And then it was after that I met this girl, had the breakup. Again, disappointment, failure. The astrologer leads me to the Castaneda. Aha, here's a whole new way to reinvent myself. Moved to Oaxaca and worked for a little while. Well, I'm have to give the condensed version. The bottom fell out of that dream also. I did meet a sorcerer, but he was younger than me, and he was kind of half crazy on LSD and so on. You can imagine, fill in the gaps. And the bottom fell out, and I ended up disinheriting my fortune and moving to North Africa to sink or swim. I thought I might die. And actually, one of the only books I took with me, and the one I read on my journey to Morocco, was Journey to Ixtlan, which is always my favorite of those books, or at least the one I read the most, because it has the most philosophical and in a way the most practical stuff in it. Like, you can apply some of those things: erasing history, assuming responsibility, using death as an advisor, losing self-importance. They can all be practiced at an internal level, and I'm still grateful to some degree, even though I feel as though it was a mixed bag. Like, I took on the good stuff and I took on the bad stuff with it. So but anyway, that book did that made it feel very meaningful what I was doing, or the context of Castaneda's teachings about erasing personal history made it meaningful to me to leave everyone behind, to disinherit my fortune and go off to Morocco, possibly to die, but to disappear off the face of the earth. I mean, that's very close to Castaneda's teachings and what he asked his disciples to do, what he claimed to do. So I really felt like I was really walking my talk at that point. And I suppose to some extent I was. I mean, it certainly was character building. But it continued anyway. I mean, that I didn't lose the human form or whatever. I didn't transcend to another level. It was just another stage, and it was a lot of it was driven unconsciously, and I kept doing it over the years, and I mean, eventually I had to see that what was driving me to seek, or the sense I had that I was seeking something, was only the conscious end of a much deeper thing within me, and the hidden end was that I was trying to escape from something. I was running from something.
And you can relate to that too, right, Hunter?
Well, I think that what's interesting, the parallel that Jason and I have, is that we both came from these very transient families. And I think that when you start to do some exploration of the people that were involved in the hierarchy of Carlos's group, every single one of them comes from some degree of trauma and has some degree of issue that made them very vulnerable and very susceptible to these types of prompts. And so I think that's the thing that is the common thread between all of us, the people that got very entrenched and involved in the Castaneda realm, is that we all had some epiphanal moment where we said, this that's happening right now, this known world cannot just be it. There's got to be something else that we are being denied, that is our birthright, that we really should have the access to. And so I think when you go into these very traditional religious spaces, and they aren't safe spaces, and they don't afford you these moments, these divine moments, then you become kind of, you feel let down. And so I based all of my my belief systems in the Castaneda realm based on my own personal experiences. I was able to find him. I was able to start going to these seminars. I was able to hear him speak directly. I became close with the witches. People I knew worked for Clear Green. I was on the periphery of this group, so I was able to observe what was happening from the participant viewpoint, but also kind of seeing behind the velvet curtain of what was really going on, and the infighting and the manipulations that were happening. So I knew that what was being sold wasn't necessarily on the up and up in terms of the collaboration. Let's all get together and have these seminars, and we are special beings and we operate at a higher level. We resonate at a higher level because we practice what we preach. The reality is a lot of those people weren't recapitulating. They weren't doing the tensegrity movements. They weren't trying to accrue inner silence. They weren't working on dreaming. And so for me, the proof was in the pudding. When I started to have experiences that were outside of the realm of normal everyday life, that's when I was like, this shit works. But I think had I taken that same intent and I practiced Qigong, or I practice yoga, or I practice exercise, you have the ability to tap into that, because everything that he was offering is inside of us already. I think the idea is our own laziness, that we need a guru or we need someone to show us the way. The reason it resonated with me is that I knew what he was saying was the truth. And so it wasn't his truth. He just happened to be the messenger. But when I started to read Gurdjieff, and started to read other spiritual texts and teachings, I was like, oh, okay, so basically what he's done is just cherry picked all the best and he's done a cliff notes of paranormal experiences or spirituality, and he's packaged it in this Indian, and people are consuming it like it's, real. So I think that it was more likely that people kind of went down Jason's track, which was starting the list, making some effort or attempt, but because there wasn't some direct connection with Castaneda, it was very easy not to feel his energy to keep you and propel you forward, to keep you on the path.
Sure, because you never had that, Jason, right? You didn't seek out other Castanedians, for lack of a better term, did you?
I didn't specifically seek out Castanedians, no. And I mean, let me think. In 1989, when I went to Oaxaca, this was before Castaneda went public. And by the time Castaneda went public, when was that? What year was
he
it
started
he
giving
became,
talks at the Phoenix Bookstore in Santa Monica, California.
Right. Yeah, well, I was in no position really at that point. I was living in Spain by that point. I didn't really have much money. I don't know if I even knew about it. It was before the days of the internet, so I probably didn't hear about it for a few years. So yeah, I mean, I might have gone for that if circumstances had been different. But no, I wasn't. I don't know how much I would have sought out Castaneda. I mean, I certainly would have obviously wanted to met him, but I wanted to meet Don Juan, and okay, yeah, Don Juan had moved on, but even that was sort of mysterious, like he was kind of here, but he wasn't here. And then there was the possibility that the lineage that Don Juan was part of was still around. I mean, that's unclear too, and it seems as though Castaneda claimed that he was the end of that lineage, but whatever, it was all very unclear. And when I went to Mexico, I did have some odd experiences, and I did get the sense that the were sorcerers and I would have dreams. I mean, throughout the years, I had many dreams about Castaneda and also what I thought was Don Juan. So I did believe for a period that I was somehow connected to the lineage in the second attention, and that all that was unfolding. In terms of actually a flesh and blood teacher, which is what I most wanted, no, I wasn't able to find anyone, or I didn't really. Besides going to Oaxaca, I didn't specifically look for somebody who might. I mean, I wouldn't have trusted anything going on in Clare Green or in Los Angeles or whatever. I was very suspicious even back then. Not enough, I would say, but for me, it had to have that mysterious kind of hidden, kind of deep in the jungle kind of feel to it. The idea of actually going to an institution and paying money would have neutralized to me the validity of it. So I think when I did hear that Castaneda was doing it, it was kind of too late for me at that point anyway, but I also thought, oh, something's gone wrong. I mean, immediately I would have thought something's gone wrong if he's actually gone public. So no, I was looking for an organic, a spirit or an intent generated encounter with my Nahal. And well, I ended up in Guatemala with this ex-junkie from Boise, Idaho, who tried to have a band and ended up basically in Guatemala trying to recover from heroin addiction, getting apprenticed into a Mayan Brotherhood, which was, all a bit shady, really, because again, it's all public stuff and it's not deep stuff. And getting apprenticed with him. So I had some sort of my fantasy collided with reality, you could say, and it was a much more mundane and limited encounter with the world of sorcery, but also less intoxicating for that reason. I did get sucked into a cult later on when I met John DeRuiter in Canada, a whole other story, but I bring it up because I think I was still carrying the baggage of Castaneda and this projected idea or image of Don Juan Matus, which I then projected onto this John DeRuiter because he was a figure who did project great power, mystery, and wisdom, hardly said anything and moved very slowly. And he sort of met, even though he was a public figure, which made me suspicious, he met my idea about what a Naha would be, like a very mysterious kind of obviously powerful character. So you could say Castaneda primed me for eventually for actually ending up in my own cult situation.
It's, you know, it's so hilarious. Pardon me for interrupting you, Chris, but what's so hilarious is that the group waited until after Castaneda was dead to have someone that they called Don Juan speak publicly. And there's a great account. There's a resource that I want to connect you with, Jason, that I'm not sure that you have ever been on, but it is an attorney who was involved very closely with Castaneda. His name is Richard Jennings. His dreaming name is Corey Donovan. And he has a site that's called sustainedaction.org. Mm-hmm. And it basically has every document involved that involves Castaneda, the Eagles Trust Agreement, which was his living will. And on there, he talks about this night that he received this invitation. And I think this was in 1998, September 23rd of 98. And when he arrived there, Rosanna Arquette was there, Joni Mitchell was there, Bruce Wagner, who had been involved, who's a film writer, who had been involved with Castaneda very closely. He was there as well. And they, you know, tromped out this 86-year-old Indian who spoke only Spanish, who looked completely the part. Mm-hmm. And then he just sat there and castigated the group and told them all how unevolved they all were, and they ate it up. They loved it. Yeah. You know, so it took Castaneda dying for these folks to get so brazen and so brave to pull someone out of the woodwork who claims that he'd met with Carlos for many years and that he was one of the people that what they're basically claiming was that Don Juan was a conglomeration of all of these different people that when Carlos was on his guru search that he interacted with.
Right.
So who knows? This guy's name was Grandfather Cachora, is allegedly his name.
Fascinating, especially because you brought in those various Hollywood characters, and it sounds like a Hollywood production.
It's so perfect, Jason. I mean, Carlos really loved fame. He loved famous people. He loved hanging out with famous people. He loved their power and their energy because he said that they resonated at a higher level than the rest of us. And so he sought out people like this. And, you know, this was just kind of on brand for what his followers, the people in the hierarchy that were left would have done, was to keep the brand going. See, we see, here he is. We've got Don Juan, you know.
So I know that psychedelics plays a big part, in at least the shamanism, the Yaqui shamanism that is in a lot of the Don Juan books. Were both of you well versed in psychedelics before this came along, and this was just kind of another tool in your belt, or did it open you up to that experience?
I had experimented. No, I hadn't. I hadn't even I wouldn't say I'd experimented. I had tried mushrooms for the first time around the time I read Castaneda. I would say it did. It raised them up to a whole other level. Like he calls them power plants. So I would have begun to associate them right away. Even that's right. I tried LSD in New York when I was 20, and then mushrooms a bit after. So I just had a very minor experience of them before I read Castaneda. And after Castaneda, they were then cemented in that context of power plants for heightened awareness, for states of heightened awareness. Although I should say that I really noticed the point that Castaneda makes in the second or the third book, that he was only given the power plants because he was stupid and that they did untold harm for the body. And that really got through to me even back then, although I have to say it didn't prevent me from taking the power plants. I guess I'm exaggerating, actually. I obviously didn't get through, but it stayed with me, and now I know it was true. That's an example. I'd say something that's very true in those books is that psychedelics do untold harm to the body, I think.
What about you, Hunter?
I had many experiences throughout my teenage years, from like 16 on with psychedelics. And they ran very parallel to my reading the Castaneda books. When I got involved with the group, and started going to these seminars, he was extremely, just drove the point home that drug taking was not part of the path. And what he said in these conferences was that because he was a man, that men's shell is very hard, and it takes a lot to crack through a man's perception. Where women, because we are the life givers, women are very fluid. He said the issue with women is that women are lazy, because slipping over into the dreaming realm, into the second attention, is so easy for women that we don't really do it. That we need the same drive that men have. That men are so driven to see, to perceive, to alter their perception, that the drugs are something that they need to crack that perception for them. So for me, in my experiments, once I got into the group and I was doing things, now I know that many of the folks in the group were doing psychedelics. When I was involved with them and I was doing things like this, I would do things like take a mushroom tea that we had concocted, and then try to go out and live in the normal world and not be affected, and to see if I could interact with people and be hallucinating and be tripping and still be normal and come off normal. The men that I did this with, like, I would open up a book and start reading and be able to focus on that, where their attention seemed to be a little bit more scattered and not able to focus and hone in on visual things specifically. So that was a part of the experiment that I put myself through, that also included not eating sugar for 5 years, not watching television, covering every mirror in my home, creating a recapitulation chamber that I went into every day, like really trying to snip away all of the things that connected me to reality, or to my normal reality, the things that make me Hunter, and make myself available to this other perception and this other energy. And in my experience, it worked. But it was because I took this very monastic approach to it. I took it seriously and did not eat sugar and shut the television off and got it out of my home, and really tried to live the ordinary life in a non-ordinary way, because that was part of the prescription.
Interesting. And how were those experiments, drinking the mushroom tea and the...
Phenomenal.
Yeah.
I could put myself in situations where, and none of these things were specifically mandated by Castaneda. Mm-hmm. It was more, their energy with me was trust your instincts. So if your instinct says to take mushroom tea and go and walk in the mountain for the afternoon, go and do that. Like be a perceiver. Don't put a wall up where you're afraid to connect with the world around you. Now, what they also mandated and claimed was that it's a predatorial universe. So if you do this, if you open yourself up to this type of stuff, be prepared that the world is going to meet you at your measure, and you may have experiences that you're not necessarily prepared for. And so that was part of that. Seeing things that weren't necessarily friendly energies, being put in situations where the people around me were vulnerable and I felt like I needed to protect them. We would go to places because we were in the inner circle. We were told where the power spots in Los Angeles were. And one of them was the UCLA Botanical Gardens on the UCLA campus. So we would take mushroom tea in the daytime and go and trip there because we were told there was a door to infinity there. And all you had to do was have enough internal silence accrued to be able to perceive that door. So, I'm such a simple monkey. You just tell me what to do and I'll go try it. And so that's what I did.
Interesting. And did you have any peak experiences like that when you were hardcore into Castaneda, Jason? Did you have some mystical epiphanies or something that you took away from it, even though you ended up leaving most of it behind anyway?
Well, it's all inseparable to me. I mean, I really internalized those teachings. As I said, as I've described, they came at a key time, and we don't have to meet individuals or join a group or get sucked into a cult to really let something reconfigure us internally. If it's the right time and we're hungry enough, we'll just devour it and assimilate it. And that's, I think, what I did with Castaneda. And as I say, there was various phases, because there was a 20 where I just had a minor heartbreak, really, but I was looking for my way. And then again at 24, it repeated, the same woman, but a much more catastrophic heartbreak where I just left everything behind, and all I had practically was Castaneda or Castaneda, Crowley and Leonard Cohen, the CCCs, and they're all pretty dark, I think, now, even Cohen. But anyway, so yeah, I was building an identity that was supposedly a no identity, my sorcerer, my Naha identity. And I mean, this is one of the things that I still don't know how to answer. How much did I generate experiences according to self-fulfilling or self-hypnosis or what have you? But I definitely felt that I was able to corroborate the teaching some of them in a practical, lived way, just by applying them in my life and in my own interiority. And then I was also having these profound dreams, and I've always been a dreamer, let's say, in the Castaneda thing. And some of them did point towards what seemed like actual encounters with sorcerers. I mean, some of them were just really, really out there, profound. And then I was also taking psychedelics in my mid-20s through to my mid-30s. I was taking psychedelics a lot, including DMT and salvia. So all of this was bleeding together, and I was apprenticing with a shaman in Guatemala and whatever else I was into in the tonal and in the ordinary realm. It was all bleeding together, and it all felt to me like it was confirming what I was reading in Castaneda's books. So, I mean, that does beg the question of what broke the spell. I'm not entirely sure if the spell is broken or if it entirely needs to be. I think that I think what I'm coming to recognize is it's a little different from what Hunter was saying, is that whatever we're seeking is in us. Yes, Hunter was saying we don't need a teacher out there or somebody to help us. I would say that may be true, of course, but I think I have needed that. But the question was finding the right one. And it's only, I think, when I met Dave O'Shana in 2007 that I really found a teacher who is trustworthy. And what I've learned hanging out with Dave is not so much that we don't need people to help us, because we do. We're all interdependent. And certainly if we can encounter somebody who is enlightened or has access to deeper awareness of reality than we have, hopefully that's going to help, unless they're abusing their power. But one thing I learned from him, I think, is that we don't need systems of knowledge. And I think that that's where the danger of a teacher is that a teacher establishes himself as a teacher because he has teachings, and the teachings get systematized, and then that creates this illusion, this false sense that we actually can attain an experience of who we are, or that we need to, and that we can attain it through following steps, when in fact who we are is right here. And it's only about letting go of all of these contrivances that we've depended on to attain something, to discover who we are. Now, I'm not saying that's a bit soundbite. Obviously, that's not easy, but just trying to make the point that it can be very counterproductive to be following a set of teachings and trying to have big experiences and epiphanies and all the rest of it, when the nature of discovering who we are is, I think it's actually antithetical to that. I think it's something very small and ordinary, and that we're just preventing it from happening the whole time. And that the spiritual quest, because the ego is so cunning, or the false identity, although of course in Castaneda's model it's the foreign implant, the installation of the flyer mind, it's so cunning that it will trick us even into, spiritual pursuits and epiphanies that we follow, and that keep us from just having that very simple awareness, or that making that very simple discovery. So yeah, I think one of the things I learned from Castaneda, which I also learned from Don Juan and all these other false teachers, is paradoxical, because it is very useful. And it's not don't trust anyone, because that wouldn't be a good thing to learn. It's don't trust systems of knowledge. Don't trust knowledge at all that's been fixed into some form. And that is weirdly, that's inseparable from what I feel I've learned from Castaneda, is that it's impossible to know how true his experiences were and where he was at. I mean, I didn't meet him like Hunter, so Hunter will have a much better sense of that. But for me, it's impossible. But based on my decades of intuitively and practically trying to explore the teachings and trying to embody them, the books, there really is truth in there. And the truth of them is inseparable from how much of a trap they are. Because if you fix truth into a written form, or even a spoken form, it's not really truth anymore. It still represents something that's true. So I still believe in quotes in the first and second and third attention, because I had such profound experiences. And sometimes I listen to tapes I made of the dreams I have, and I feel it still. I think, my God, that really was something happening there. But I no longer refer to the knowledge or even the experiences much, because it's all tangled up with that sorcerer's trap. And it is in the books. Even Don Juan, as quoted by Castaneda, says sorcery is a dead end. It's such a bizarre paradox. Like, the books tell you not to trust them, but that's the paradox. Like the Cretans saying all Cretans are liars. You're like, how do you process that? Do I believe him or do I don't? Yeah.
Hunter, did you find that questioning of the teachings themselves in that context was discouraged? Were you kind of kept between the lines?
I think that there was a mandate to believe what was being told to you in the moment. So there were many, many contradictions. And people that would go to these seminars, I mean, you're talking about some people who had taken their life savings and traveled from some tiny little town in, Eastern Bloc Russia to come, and they would pull out their Russian translation of the book and say, on page 238, you said this, and now you're saying something completely contradictory. Like, how do you reconcile that? And he would say, throw my books away. Throw them away. That was then. What I'm saying right now is what the energy on the wall is telling me. I'm receiving direct knowledge. So when you create a chasm like that, and you try to separate yourself from people who really take these books as scripture and as doctrine, it gives you plenty of room to fill in new gaps and to say, well, no, that doesn't apply now. Now it's this. And so there's this constant carrot dangling that's being held in front of you of, this is the only person that has this knowledge, and this knowledge is dying with him because he's the end of this lineage. And so if you don't quickly do all of this work, then the moment he burns from within, you're going to miss your opportunity to grab a hold of that comet as he leaves and makes his transition. So some folks that were involved truly took everything that he said as a gospel and cut off ties with family, lived this very, very rigid life because they thought, well, I'm a bored fuck and I don't really have a shot to reach infinity, but I'm going to give it everything I possibly have in this tiny little window that we have, and I'm going to try to grab a hold of his light as he makes his journey. So just to quickly touch upon one thing that Jason said that I feel like is such a salient point, I definitely believe that we need each other. We need community. We need people. When I say that, what I'm talking about is this idea that you can buy knowledge, or that you can buy spiritual freedom, or that you can somehow circumnavigate doing any work to get quote unquote there. I think that that's the mentality that a lot of Westerners have, is just tell me how much to pay. Where do I send my money in to get my spiritual card? And then I'll start dreaming, and then I'll start seeing energy, and I'll have all this knowledge and awareness because I've paid my due. What I believe is that if you're seeking someone outside of yourself to show you the path or give you the answers, then you're setting yourself up to fail, because it's always going to be someone on the exterior that has the answer for you. Mm-hmm. What I'm saying is that everything that we need on this earth to make any type of transition is internal inside of us. It's our ego that stops us from connecting with that power and that energy. It's the idea of the other that gives us this sense of powerlessness, like, well, I'm too dumb, or I'm too thick, or I'm too rigid to get knowledge, so I need someone else to give me the path or show me the way. I think every moment that we live is a teaching moment. I think every interaction we have an opportunity to be present and to really connect with each other. And that was one of the things that I really got from his world, was that when you were standing in front of him and he was speaking to you, you felt like there was not another person on this planet that had this connection and that was getting this level of interaction. He just had that ability and that power. And what he claimed that came from was accruing internal silence. That his brain wasn't going crazy with all of these answers and trying to figure out what he was going to say next, that he was fully present in the moment. And that's why you were attracted to being around him. He claims that he came out into the public sphere at the urging of Nuri Alexander, a woman that they initially claimed was the Blue Scout, that was his quote-unquote daughter, that was trapped in the second attention, that he went and rescued her and brought her back, and then in some bizarre twist ended up marrying her, which was just seemed very, it's one of the, again,
through
one of
Jerry Lee Lewis.
Well, it was a way to protect his finances, and he also claimed that it was a way to psychically link himself to these women. So he was married to Florinda Donner, he was married to Taisha Abelar, he was married to Muni, he was married to Nuri Alexander, and my belief is that a lot of that was a bid to block the person who was a child that he purportedly raised at some point in his life from his first wife. They were trying to get money from the Castaneda estate as he was growing more gravely ill. And so in a bid to protect his finances, they quickly changed the will. He'd married multiple women. He'd not divorced multiple women. So, again, this very complicated, convoluted thing that you're not supposed to question. The inner workings of their world, when you peel the layers back, didn't look very sorceric.
Wouldn't he have had to have been in Utah or somewhere to have had 4 wives? I mean, legally.
They did it in Los Angeles. And I really urge you again, Jason, to go to the sustainaction.org site, because you can see all of these documents, all the marriage licenses, the Eagle Trust agreement that is his last will and testament, photos. My friend Corey Donovan, as I mentioned, who was part of the group, who did a tremendous amount of research over the years that he was involved with Castaneda, and then in subsequent years after Castaneda's death, he's put together this site that has basically sat stagnant, but for very fervent Castaneda followers, they know about it, and they go and they read. There's just literally hundreds of pages of information and research that have been done from that time, that include transcripts from talks that were given. So it's really, I urge you to go there, Jason. I think you would really enjoy it.
Is there anything there about the alleged CIA links?
I'm so glad that you have brought that up, because after Castaneda died, I went through a period where I felt like I'd woken up from the dream somewhere in the midst of all of it when I saw how crazy everyone went in the group. I realized maybe I had been duped. There was a few times during seminars where I knew they had put everyone under hypnosis. I looked around the room and everyone was asleep. It was amazing. So I started to question my own belief system, and what did it take for me to be drawn into this? Why was I so gullible and so vulnerable to this person? It was probably my childhood. It was this transient life that I had grown up with. It was a need and a desire to find some other reality that made more sense than the one that I lived in. And so putting all those pieces together, I started to think, it's very possible that there's something else here at play. I knew that he was someone who was a voracious reader and someone who really, really loved to study methods of mind control and hypnosis and thought control and being able to thought projection. So as I started to delve into the timeline and look at where he was in the United States at the time of MK Ultra, if you go to Graham Hancock's website, he has a very comprehensive list of all of the agencies that were involved in MK Ultra. And one of the places that they worked very specifically with were psychology departments, archaeology departments, anthropology departments, and sociology departments. Well, at the time, Castaneda was in the anthropology department at UCLA. What I opine is that it's very possible, if you look at his timeline, which is also on the sustainaction.org site, it's listed under Prelude to Don Juan, Castaneda's early years. It's basically a breakdown of from birth where Castaneda was. There's a period where he starts to kind of connect with people that seem like maybe they are Don Juan-esque archetypes. This is in the beginning, when he was still going to LA City College. At that point, I think that somewhere he decided on his own to not necessarily start a religion, but to start a movement. He was a very charming man. He was attractive. He was a small Peruvian man. He got a lot of attention from women in Los Angeles. And I think that his way of, I would hate to say, to really simplify all of his teachings down to this, but I think one of the ways that he got girls was creating this mythical guru and this teacher, because all of the people around him in the beginning were women. And if you look at their research and you look at his research, it really sounds like they were being dosed as well. In Taisha Abelar's book, I have a unpublished second copy or second edition follow-up to her first book that she wrote. In that book, in her second book, she talks about having sex with a crow. Now, in all of these experiences, when you read the experiences, it always happens after they drink this hot cocoa. There's always some chocolate, some hot chocolate, beautiful tasting mixture that they're given, and then they have this mystical experience where Don Juan appears as a crow, and she's having sex with this crow, and then she wakes up and she realizes that it's Castaneda. What it sounds like to me is that he dosed her and then he had sex with her. And the disassociative nature of the mind creates, if you've implanted this idea of being able to change into an animal, being able to morph into another being, or having some other beings in your presence, it's very easy to imagine that someone would be able to disassociate themselves and think that that thing was happening. And then when they wake up, the guilt or the remorse or just the idea of being raped or being violated by someone that you trust is so traumatizing that you just kind of go along with the program that you fucked a crow. So I think that there was some of that going on. A lot of the MK Ultra stuff, when you look at it, is not people that are knowingly working with the CIA. They were given money, they were given grants, they didn't know where the money was coming from. So my opinion is that Carlos was involved, maybe knowingly or unknowingly, with MK Ultra. He was given the prompts or the ability to create this caricature. Maybe he had a meeting with someone that put him under hypnosis. I have no idea. But that's kind of what the track that I've been led down is that when you start to peel the layers back of his story, it just seems like there was dosing going on of the people around him that were then claiming to be students of Don Juan's and having these mystical experiences.
Yeah, that seems very typical though of a cult. That's happened in a lot of cults where people were dosed and put in certain environments where ideas are very easily implanted. Where it's very easy to sway somebody or push somebody or nudge somebody in a particular direction. So yeah, I didn't realize that at all. You said on Graham Hancock's website there's a list of what? All of these different organizations that were MK Ultra?
Graham has done some tremendous work, and it's a list of all of the agencies and institutions that were involved with MK Ultra. And it's not just in the United States. We're talking worldwide. We're talking universities all through Europe. The list is exhaustive. And what's so interesting about it to me is that it makes sense how MK Ultra probably stopped in the 70s formally, but these other splinter agencies or these other splinter organizations still moved forward with the program, maybe unknowingly. And, you know, you're talking about media companies. So that gives a wide dearth of access to people's minds and brains and the ability to go in and feed any information you want. So advertising agencies are involved and food corporations are involved. And it's not just going into a scholastic or an educational system where you are susceptible to being mind controlled. It's really in our daily life. So I think once I cracked that open, it made sense to the other people in the Castaneda world. When we started to kind of unpack all of that, it was like, wow, there could be maybe something to this. I remember years ago, one of the women who was in the group, again, another peripheral woman, sent me an email after Carlos died and said, hey, do you want to start a cult? Now, I thought what was so fascinating about that was not her brazen question, but when I went onto her, this is how long this dates this, I went onto her MySpace page. She listed herself, as artist, filmmaker, musician, painter, and then one of the last things she listed herself as was CIA agent, like CIA operative. And I remember thinking back then, wow, wouldn't that be weird if like this whole Castaneda thing was like a government program? And then, you don't want to believe that you've been duped or that you've somehow been involved in something like that. So I just buried that. I was like, oh no, he's who he says he is. So
easy to deny, but it really seems like a typical, like it could very well be an experiment or mind control experiment on many levels. Yeah.
Did you, Hunter, did you ever see or hear about this book that he was supposedly working on, Assassin, that Amy Wallace mentions?
I never saw any copy of any book that he was working on. I worked very closely with Amy Wallace. When she started to write The Sorcerer's Apprentice, she hired me to edit that book. Amy had some substance abuse issues, some really serious substance abuse issues that ended up killing her. I found it very difficult to work with her because she had a really hard time keeping a comprehensive timeline and story about her connection with Castaneda. So again, it was like someone who waited till he was dead to say, this is the level of our intimacy. I was his girlfriend. This is what was going on between us. I mean, she told us horror stories of things that he did to her, to humiliate her. The reason that people were so silent in his group was he was very quick to boot you out. If you said the wrong thing, if you acted inappropriately, if you dressed inappropriately, if you did something that he didn't like, you would suddenly be kicked out and not be called to the secret Sunday meetings that he was having, invited over to the house to have parties. Like you would be ostracized from the group. You would not be allowed to speak to anyone else in the group. So that was really his way of keeping control over people like Amy. From my recollection of him, he was in no state to be writing any book. If anything that was happening with that, it was people around him that were kind of pushing him and urging him on. He hated computers. He hated cell phones. He didn't like to be in or around any of those things. And just quickly as a sidebar, the gentleman who purports to be Don Juan at the meeting that they have claims that ginseng is this amazing root and that should be taken for vitality. I remember very specifically at a talk that Carlos said, never take ginseng. Ginseng's terrible for you. It's awful for you. It's too stimulating. It heats up the blood. He was very anti-pot. Like I said before, he was anti-hallucinogenics. He did not recommend that people took anything like that. But I did find that was so hilarious that these people didn't do enough research to go back and say, oh, wow, maybe we should read these talks that are online and see what Castaneda said before we bandy this guru about and claim that he's Don Juan, who is going to completely contradict what Carlos said. So.
And what were you telling me earlier today, Hunter, about there was like 9 different origin stories of how Carlos stumbled upon Don Juan?
It's really, really hilarious. Again, on this sustainaction.org site, I have it pulled up right here, there are 8 different origin stories that go out throughout the years. The last one being from the active side of infinity. The one before that is a Keith Thompson interview that he did in 1994. And take 6 is Psychology Today in 1972. He has an example in Journey to Islam in 1972. He has another example. So again, I think it's kind of, it's the audience. So whoever he was talking to in the moment, he engaged some different part of the story where he either made himself a hero or the villain. He made himself out to be an idiot or just a curious student. But there's lots of different versions on there. And I urge you to go on there and read them because it's really hilarious to see that the guy couldn't keep his story straight. And it seems like if you had met this Indian who slapped you on the back and was able to shift your assemblage point and show you different perceptions and open this whole second attention to you, that you would kind of remember how that happened. And it would be a common story that was being told, that you wouldn't have variances that made you, your ego satisfied at a different level in each telling.
Mm-hmm. Jason, how important to you was it when you were going through that period of time that these things were true? Was that even a part of the game, or were these crucial fictions, as you would say? Or
well, they were for me, but that's that part of the crucial fiction. It's crucial is that you don't realize they're fiction. So,
sure.
It was important for me to believe in the reality of Don Juan, and more or less to believe in the truth of the teachings. But as far as them being point by point exactly accurate, no. I mean, I always found it hard to believe that he could possibly have been taking notes, just the most mundane thing. He describes himself taking notes in his trouser pocket. I just could never believe that.
And Jason could never present them.
Mm.
He was asked when it came time for him to do his thesis and for him to get his PhD, he was asked for his field notes and he didn't have them. Now, I'm a writer. I've been a writer since I was a little kid. I have scraps of pieces of paper all over my home. And that's just me jotting weird random thoughts down. You would imagine that someone was going through this doctorate program, that they would take exhaustive notes and have those exhaustive notes transcribed and be able to present them to someone.
It would have been very easy to fake as well if it wanted to. I mean, even if he invented the stories, he would have had lots of notes, right? So he could have, I mean, it wouldn't have been that hard.
It seems a little lazy, actually. But yet,
yeah, not to fake them.
I think, I mean, part of this is, it's complicated, right? And part of this would be rationalization, but certainly it was one of the rationalizations I had, which is the world that Castaneda was allegedly writing about, as I was believing it, was a separate reality. And so it seemed to me that it would be foolish to expect that somehow accounts of those experiences could be framed in the way that we would normally frame experiences. So it's similar to the UFO. Like, there's something about encounters with the UFO that the very nature of it is this kind of anomaly that breaks the laws of physics and that enters into this reality and actually kind of erases the line between dream, what we think of as dream, and actually waking reality. That's very much the nature of Castaneda's, the world he's describing. He's saying, you know, that awareness is the currency of existence, and that we are just perceivers, we're just perception, and that reality isn't really, there is something out there, but it's not what we think it is. You know, we're interpreting it, and we're creating an interpretation and then mistaking, and so on, right? We all know the drill. And
Sure.
so once you start going down that rabbit hole, it's, you know, it's like, what the bleep do we know? It's all in the New Age thing, like the quantum universe. There isn't a fixed solid reality. So to somehow expect books that are representing that experience to be literally factually accurate would be naive, because if they were true, then they're saying that nothing is true in the way that we think it is. So that sort of creates this get out clause, not just for Castaneda and for a lot of New Age, maybe hucksters, but anyway, opportunists, let's say, but also for us, for me as a reader. Like I knew, or I believed I knew, that I didn't have to square it with my rational mind, because my rational mind was too limited anyway to grasp this. So when I read something like DeMille's The Power and the Allegory, for example, it did, you know, it undermined my belief. It shook my belief a little bit. It was challenging. But I also felt, well, he's too limited. I mean, I felt by reading it, his own perception or his own understanding is too limited. He's not really doing justice to Castaneda. And I certainly was never, you know, but the people who are just saying he made it all up, to me, it had no credibility at all, because they just, to me, if they hadn't really tuned into those books, they're definitely more than just ordinary fantasy fiction. There's something, the whiff of the real. I'll still say this to this day. They couldn't have captured me the way they captured me if they didn't have some real thread of truth or reality in them. So then when I started to see, well, you know, in terms of chronology and all that, they don't add up. One of the ways, and actually I had a partner at this time who said she received this in a dream. So here we go, you know, how this works. Because she was deep into Castaneda, and when we met, it was online, and I sent her some of my dreams that included Castaneda or Don Juan, and she said, "Oh, I had that dream too. That's me." And she wasn't bullshitting. I mean, we ended up together for 4 years, so she was sincere. She genuinely believed it. And then I found dream I'd had of her before I'd met. I'd written down. I'd even named her. So there's definitely truth in this. We do exist in this other reality that sometimes
Right.
access through dreams. So anyway, and she was told in a dream or whatever she received that Castaneda had dreamed the books, and that many of the encounters he was describing were in the second attention. And in other words, he'd woken up and he'd been able to write down. And so if that were true at all, then of course they wouldn't add up. They wouldn't. It wasn't Arizona bus station at 10 a.m. or they were. Yeah. He wouldn't know. He'd have to, if he wanted to present them as real, he'd have to make that stuff up. Say, you know. So that gave me lots of leeway. Like, I didn't really, like you're saying, Chris, it wasn't that I didn't care if they were true or not. I didn't believe in that distinction anyway. Mm-hmm. So whether that happened in the second attention or in the first attention, it didn't matter, because to me, both attentions were real, right? And so yeah, so I mean, and to some extent, that's still how I feel. But I would say that whatever Castaneda attempted there was very dangerous, and I think he felt, you know, live by the pen, die by the pen. If you try and literalize truth, or if you try and import second attention dream experience into the first attention narrative, it's going to get horribly distorted. Like, things that are profoundly true but sort of metaphorical in the second attention become psychopathic behaviors in the first attention, like kill your children. That's fine if it's metaphorical, but not if it's literal, right? So I think there's many examples like that in the teaching.
Right, but he's not talking metaphorically.
I know.
What he's saying is that when you have a child, they take a whole of energy out of you, and that if you want to make it on this journey, you have to get that energy back. That you are literally an adversary and in a battle, an energetic battle with your parent up until the point that your parent dies. So what you're trying to do is, as the kid, you're trying to keep that energy, and what the parent's trying to do is get their energy back. And that's what the recapitulation, accruing inner silence, dreaming, all of these things purportedly do, is heal that wound or that hole. But how many people separate themselves from their children and are able to have a disassociated relationship with their kids where they still maintain a connection to them, but they don't have that same internal charge if the kid gets hurt or upset, or, I don't know many people that have that capability to distance themselves from someone that they love.
Yeah, well, that is a great example, isn't it? Because it's a spectrum between metaphor and reality. Like, we're all enmeshed with our parents, and in order to become autonomous, we need to disentangle those threads, whether they're literal energy threads or just metaphor. And that part of that is a metaphorical act of, well, destroying the internal image. Actually, that's the psychotherapeutic process. We have to witness the image, the internal image of our parents destroyed, so that we know that it is safe to exist without them. And so that can be a metaphorical process that's an internal energetic one,
right?
That has almost a literal correspondence. But somebody who was too literal minded and could take it all the way to sorcerers killing their children, which is an ancient practice.
Right. Well, what Carlos said to Taisha Abelar was that her mother was so abusive to her, and she said this in a group of 500 people. She told the story that Castaneda said, "You have to go back and beat your mother up." And what Taisha says is that she reconnected with her family and went and beat the shit out of her mother at Castaneda's insistence, because he said that was the only way that she was going to be able to disengage this link that she and her mother had, as if she physically harmed her.
Wow. And I doubt that would work, honestly. I mean, it wouldn't be worth it if it did, probably, but I really doubt that it would be an effective way. And it's one of the definitions of insanity that I came up with, which is literalizing what doesn't need to be literalized. And to me, that's been a consistent trap that I've recognized in occult and in spiritual teachings, is this tendency to literalize things that don't need to be literalized. And then when you do literalize them, they potentially become the very inverse of what.
He tells a story about this child, CJ, that he was taking care of as a young boy, and was bitten by a spider. And he told CJ, "Well, bite the spider back." And so he took the spider and ate it.
Right.
And that was his way of disengaging that initial energetic exchange that they just had. He told another story about this couple that was having terrible trouble with their child. This kid was running away and just super precocious. And so what Castaneda said was, hire someone that your child doesn't know to hide in the bushes outside of your house. And when the kid runs outside, have this guy jump out of the bushes and beat the shit out of the kid.
Yeah.
And allegedly, these parents did this, and the kid never ran away again. Because the idea was that this outside force, obviously your child doesn't respect you enough to listen to you saying, don't run away, don't run outside, don't go outside. You need this outside force to come in for your kid to see that you're actually the protector and the outside world is a dangerous place.
Right. Yeah, trauma-based mind control.
Exactly.
Yeah. To what extent do you think the whole Castaneda thing was social engineering, Jason?
Well, I mean, I have a tendency, and we probably all do, but I certainly have a tendency to do it consciously, which is to go, well, it's like a nail to dry out a nail, isn't it? Because I believe so much in Castanedas, say, or psychedelics, or whatever else it was. When I start to see something's wrong, I follow the leads, and then I, as we tend to do, we try and make a coherent picture. And we want the coherent picture to be one that's enough to counteract the crucial fiction, to help us get free of the spell that we're under. Mm-hmm. So I'd say that I was at least willing to go all the way with Castaneda to, yeah, it was all social engineering and it was trauma-based mind control and so on. But only so far, so that I could really see what would be left, of my beliefs around that, or of my experiences rather. If I was able to neutralize or cancel out the belief in Castaneda with the belief in that it was all social engineering, those two beliefs cancel themselves out, and I'm sort of, I don't know, man. So then I've just got to re-examine the experiences and, well, what do I know? Which isn't much, to be frank, but I mean, specifically around Castaneda. But I do think that the truth generally isn't in extremes. It tends to be in some kind of liminal, shady, ambiguous overlap. I think that's why it's so hard to really find the truth, is because we want something rock solid, and it's too subtle, really, to be that way. And so, yeah, it was wrong with me to take Castaneda so literally that, as I did, but I don't really go along with Jan Irving, so I don't. I mean, Jan Irving and I we can't even talk about Castaneda because he just wants to throw out everything. I mean, just if Castaneda was, a CIA or part of MK Ultra, that just to him means all of it's bullshit. Well, I think that's very simple-minded. I mean, if it was all bullshit, it wouldn't be effective as a tool of social engineering. Mm-hmm. Social engineering uses the truth. It uses occult principles to control us, let's say, or to trick us. So then it's both true and untrue again. And I mean, and also something can become, something can start out quite positive and become, as I said, the very inverse of it if it gets taken too literally and it hooks into a person's trauma patterns and neuroses and all the rest of it. So, I mean, I see the whole of culture as sort of social engineering and trauma-based mind control. I think Hunter does too, from things he said today. So sure. Then, I mean, yeah, it's not just Castaneda. As I say, it doesn't neutralize the truth. I mean, if something is used, and so like we use cheese to catch mice, that doesn't make cheese poison, or it doesn't mean we can't use cheese in some other way, or that mice can't enjoy cheese without losing their life, right? see these kind of things the same way. It's really how we take them and how we apply them.
But if someone said to you, I am the one who developed cheese, and the only cheese you're ever going to be able to truly get is from me, and once I die the cheese is going to be gone, but you go into the market and you see 10,000 different versions of cheese, then for me there comes a point where you step back from that and you go, well, maybe this person was saying something that satisfied them or helped them have some ego need served. For me, I look at how he treated the people that were closest to him. I look at how he treated the seminars and the reverence that he had in these spaces, these public spaces where people, as again, I'm saying some people took their life savings to come to a seminar just to be in the same room with this person because they really felt like he was, I wouldn't say the second coming of Christ, but he was a guru who had some secret knowledge that you had to be in the room or be around him to get. And in examination of how he treated the people around him, he was very abusive. He did things that didn't make sense. He had a specific type of woman that he liked. So he sought women that looked like that and would bring them in to his world. One of the seminars, he was asked, well, why did you come public? Why all of a sudden, after all these years, are you writing more books and you're giving these talks and lectures and you're putting yourself out in the world? And he said that Nuri Alexander, the Blue Scout, said to him at one point, you have to monetize this sorcery and this world, because you've been selling this thing, selling it for free. You've basically been giving this knowledge out, and people don't really take it seriously. They're not really walking the walk. But if you put a dollar amount on it, then when you give a seminar, 400 people are going to come in this room and they're going to have 100% of their attention on you because they've paid their money, and so they want to get something out of it. Because we live in this merchant mentality of, I give you something and you give me something back. So he went from this blank check of affection with the world and saying, I'm giving freely this information, to now we have to put a dollar amount on it, and it's $1,200 to come to the seminar, and we're doing it in this exotic location. And so it created this excitement around it, because then you were going on a trip to go and see the guru and, staying in this beautiful hotel, and all these other people were moony-eyed like you are, and everyone is hugging, and it's this community that we all feel like we need to have in order to make that transition into this other realm. I think what you're talking about when you were mentioning this woman is this morphogenic field that Rupert Sheldrake has written about and done a lot of research about. I'm sure you know Sheldrake. I believe that you were connecting with this woman in this morphogenic field. Now we can call it Castaneda because that's the placeholder in the universe, but who's to say that you would not have dreamed with her or had these connections with her without the Castaneda element there? That wasn't necessarily the glue that bound you, it was actually your energy that was binding you. We just called it Castaneda to give it some solidity.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's one of the tricks of, it's ironically a trick of sorcery, is to capture our attention. So because I had been so imprinted by those Castaneda books, and they probably did trigger something within me, like they did awaken some potential in me. But then when I started to have those experiences, that was the frame of reference. So it's like I would have imported Castaneda or Don Juan into those experiences just to have a familiar face, and then I associate. And that's, of course, the trick that every guru does. If he can give the participant a profound experience, then he can imprint them with his own presence, and they'll forever after associate it with him, and they're not being liberated.
Exactly.
Well, it's we're almost at really exactly an hour and a half right now, and I want to be mindful of your time, Jason. So if you feel like we're all at a good stopping place.
Well, I did kind of have that feeling of closure, didn't I, in that particular moment. So
sure.
I said, let's go with it. I do want to mention something to Hunter, just as a thing, curious if you're familiar with or not. It's this book, La Vida Secreta de Carlos Castaneda. Have you heard about this book?
Yes, it was written by
Manuel Caballado or something.
Yeah.
I haven't, because my Spanish is, well, I'm too lazy, I should say. I do speak Spanish, but to try and read a Spanish book, I'm just too lazy. But I just wanted to mention it if you hadn't heard about it.
Oh, that's awesome. Yes. Thank you.
And if you guys want to, leave any trails for people to follow of anything that we were talking about today, or your personal endeavors, now would be a good time to do that.
I'm good.
What did you say, Jason?
That's so humble. For example, now the only thing I'd mention is the piece I wrote on Castaneda, which what's it called again? A Sorcerer's Corner or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
It's about Carlos Castaneda anyway. Anyway, that's you can find that at my website, horticulture.com, in the articles section.
And there's a good deal of Castaneda talk in the latest episode of The Liminalist too, right?
That's true. So yeah, it continues to pop up, and that's the kind of thing we didn't get into. I don't want to open a whole other topic, but when something has affected us as profoundly as it has, it's quite hard to disentangle. So that's why we're having this conversation, I suppose, for me anyway. It's still an attempt to understand the affinity there, or whatever it was that made me susceptible to Castaneda's influence. And the more I can understand it, I think, the more I can sort of cancel out that allegiance, which I don't really think is healthy. I do want to actually also second what Hunter said about the way that a person is with other human beings is absolutely the bottom line for me. Also, that's the acid test, and I wouldn't recommend Castaneda to people anymore, even though the books are the same books. But based on how he ended up, I wouldn't recommend even the books.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Fantastic. Well, thanks a lot, Jason, for agreeing to do this. And I have just begun Prisoner of Infinity, and I'll let you know as I progress when I'm nearing the end, and we can meet up again and talk about that if you're still willing to do that.
Sure. Yeah, anytime, Chris.
Cool. Well, thanks again. And are you hungry, Hunter? You want to eat something? She's just in the other room of my house.
All right. Yeah, that's funny.
I'll edit that part
Illusion.
out. Yes.
It was great. It was great to meet you, Jason. It's such an honor to have your time. I really thank you for the conversation. It was wonderful. Seriously, I really found it riveting to hear your thoughts and your viewpoints. So thank you.
Well, thank you likewise. It's great to meet.
Fantastic. Well, have a good evening, Jason.
Thanks.
Yeah. Take care.
All
We'll
right.
be in touch. All right. That was a very fascinating conversation. It was interesting to get Hunter and Jason together and have them, have the opportunity to be able to talk to each other about their own experiences with Castaneda and his writings and the mystique and enigma surrounding all of that and the controversy there towards the end. So it was great. I felt honored to be able to witness it and interject every once in a while, sometimes awkwardly. But and as I said at the end of the episode, Jason will be back again. We're in the middle of talking to him about the trilogy of books that he has out, Seen and Not Seen, Prisoner of Infinity, and The Vice of Kings. And I just started his second book, so that will be coming soon. And there will be at least one more, if not a few more, discussions with Hunter about her vast number of experiences that she had with the cult of Castaneda. Very interesting. She's just a wellspring of experience and wisdom about that. And I wasn't, before I met her, I wasn't even aware that Carlos Castaneda had anything remotely resembling a cult following. So my mind was blown, to say the least. And I'll pass that on to you. All right. If you like the show, and by the way, thank you for listening to it. If you like this show and you would like to support it in any way that you can, could be as little as $1 a month. Please go to www.patreon.com/themeltpodcast, and there's plenty of ways to donate. And if you can't afford to donate financially, then please just spread the word around. That's how people find out about this. And I'm relying on you to help out with that. And it's very simple to do. So if you know somebody that you think might be into it, then just pass the link along. And speaking of that, there is now a place marker at www.themeltpodcast.com. So if you go there, you'll actually see a visual instead of under construction, which means steps are still being taken in order to get that up and running, and I'm hoping within the next month that will happen. I'm supposed to get a face-to-face tutorial on how to do all of that and choreograph it myself next week. So hopefully we'll be seeing advances in that area very, very soon. Also, too, I want to remind you that when I first conceived of the Melt podcast, this was going to be basically a compilation of stories from people and their firsthand experiences with all the things that fall out of the spectrum of consensus reality, whether that be drug experiences, religious experiences, paranormal experiences, you name it. Anything that can't be easily quantified or categorized. It was just going to be a bunch of people telling their stories about those things. And I still do incorporate those when they seem appropriate to the episode, and I am still collecting them. So if you have anything that you feel might be of interest or that you would like to share with other people, feel free to email a recording of that story to themeltpodcast@gmail.com, and it would be greatly appreciated. And I will let you know when your story appears on any given episode. All right. Again, thank you all so much for listening. It's greatly appreciated. And until next time, take care.